Hello, I'm here today to report on some recent findings. For context, for the past couple of months, I would say maybe even a year, I basically have been trying to make the most of my monthly descents into madness, aka the luteal phase, aka the week to 10 days to sometimes 2 weeks before my period. For those who aren't familiar with that, it is characterized by a lot of different, very uncomfortable symptoms, one of which is the fact that we are very extra sensitive during that period. Some people call it PMS, and some people who have extreme symptoms, like myself, call it PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. But what I have been doing in the past couple of months is that I have basically tried to make the most out of it. And the way I do that is that every time I just wait for my period to arrive, but I just make sure that while I'm in the luteal phase and while I'm extra sensitive, first of all, I give myself a lot of grace, but then I also try to observe. I just observe all of my dark thoughts, etc. And then once my period arrives after a couple of days, because the first days of the period, I'm dead. But then around like day 4 to 5 of my period, which is kind of where I am now, I take time to reflect and I journal and I ask myself, what were the biggest triggers of this past luteal phase? And every single time, without fault, I uncover some stuff and some shadows if you want. If you want to use the lexicon and vocabulary of shadow work, I uncover some shadows that had been lurking and looming over me, my life, my brain, my psyche, and my perception of reality. And every month, thanks to this new practice that I incorporated, I'm able to evolve into a better person and just improve my quality of life a little bit more every time and feel a little bit lighter and wiser. And that is why today I'm going to share with you the 3 key takeaways that I uncovered from this past luteal phase. Because this past luteal phase was not like other luteal phases. It was the worst of 2025, first of all, by far. It lasted, instead of 10 days, it lasted 6 weeks. You heard me. And so my period was 29 days late to be precise. And I understand why now that I've uncovered the shadows that needed to be uncovered, because these shadows are things that have been having a very negative impact on my life and my perception of reality and my identity since I was a child, basically. And I'm going to have to, now that I have uncovered it, I'm going to have to spend the next couple of weeks/months digesting it, but uncovering it is already, I would say, honestly, half of the work. The big theme of my past luteal phase and the reason why it has ruined my summer is the toxic codependent relationship between shame and repressed emotions. I'm going to give you the 3 things that the 3 lessons that I got from this past luteal phase, and I'm going to go from general to specific. What I mean by that is that the first one is really going to apply to society as a whole, regardless of gender or anything. The second one can apply to everybody, but most likely, and you're going to see why, will probably apply more to girls than boys. And the third one, the last one, will apply to an even smaller group of people who are in my case, and that's people who have repressed anger due to CPTSD that has turned into shame. And so if you stay until the end, if you kind of feel like that might be you. So the first thing that I have really realized in my latest descent into madness this summer is just how big of a part the repression of emotions has played in the many illnesses that we see in modern society as a whole. We have been passed on this false belief from generation to generation that there is a hierarchy of emotions. It's true that there are negative and positive emotions, it is also true that there are pleasant and unpleasant emotions. The problem is that we have equated negative, positive, pleasant, unpleasant to good and bad. What I'm saying is that we have assigned, many of us at least, have assigned moral value to emotions. And I'm not going to explore why that is, but I think a lot of it has to do probably with religion. We're not going to get into that today. But even as someone who wasn't raised in a religious household, it has still, because that's the thing with religion, it has had such an impact on society, on many societies for a long time, that these things have kind of spilled into even the secular parts of society. And so many parents, thinking that they're doing the right thing because that's what they were taught, again, that's how generational trauma in part is passed, teach their children that there are good and bad emotions. And because that is not true in terms of, if you were to ask Mother Nature if there are good and bad emotions, Mother Nature would tell you no. For instance, animals, when you see animals have good and bad emotions, for instance, you'll see a cat or a dog get angry, and another moment you'll see them be all lovey-dovey. The cat and the dog doesn't even comprehend the fact that the time where they got angry was a bad emotion, quote unquote, and the time where they were cuddling with you was a good one. And that's because that's a social construct. It's not a law, a truth of nature. And how do you teach that to a small child, something that is a law of nature? The best way to make sure that your little child is going to comprehend as quickly as possible what good and bad emotions are and express the bad ones as little as possible, especially in public, is through shame. This is probably not the first time that I have mentioned shame, and it is certainly not going to be the last, because it is the bane of my existence. It is the bane of so many people's existence. I've seen it in my parents. I've seen it in people around me. Again, used a lot in religion. It is one of the most powerful tools for manipulation, for manipulating humans at a societal level, at an individual level. It is so powerful because basically it acts, okay, this isn't a chip, but it acts like a chip that you can implant in someone's brain. And a lot of parents implant it knowingly or unknowingly into their children's brains because many times they themselves have it implanted in their brains. The way shame works and why it's so powerful is that once you implant it into the brain, then you can just press that remote, that little button, and activate the shame in someone, and that person will immediately feel shame, which is the worst feeling in the world, and will then be more easy to control and will not behave in ways that you have taught them, where you have taught them to feel shame for said behavior. And then the worst part is that once you have used that remote control enough, and it's kind of like also like dogs where you electrocute them to train them, then that you don't even need the remote control anymore. You don't even need to be there anymore. That kid grows up and is going to go out in the world, and it's going to be just like a reflex. And so every time they're going to even think about behaving a certain way where you have taught them to feel shame for it, they're going to feel shame for it. So they're not going to do it. Or when they do it, they're going to feel horrible about it. So what does this look like in actual practical terms? Now, I'm going to use generalizations, but it's really just for the purpose of creating an example that is clear and understandable for most people. So I would say that most boys are taught that sadness is not masculine. I have seen so many times a little boy cry, and the way to make them stop is to tell them that they're a big boy and big boys don't cry. Similarly, girls are taught that anger is not a very feminine and attractive trait to have in little girls and in girls and in women. As such, boys and girls are taught to feel shame when they respectively express sadness and anger. The issue is, like we said, anger and sadness are not bad emotions. They are negative and unpleasant emotions, but they are not bad emotions. And they basically, in nature, all emotions are equal. And in life, all emotions will be felt all the time. You cannot control that. I wish I could have told myself that so many years ago. So boys will feel sadness their entire lives because it's a recurring emotion like every emotion, and girls will feel anger a lot of times throughout their lives. The problem is if you have trained them well enough to feel really shameful about these emotions, what's going to happen is that they're not even gonna know how to consciously recognize those emotions, because the shame they feel whenever that emotion pops up will be so strong that it will immediately be repressed. And this is why I say that this is the root of so many illnesses in today's society, because what do repressed emotions look like? They look like you projecting on others. They look like you comparing yourself to others. They look like procrastination. They look like burnout. They look like depression. They look like addiction. They look like food disorders. They look like numbing, escapism, and abuse. Last but not least, they look like shaming. When you see other people express the emotions that you feel so much shame for, and you're not even fully conscious of it, it triggers you and you're going to shame them for expressing them. How dare you? So lesson number 1 is to truly, once you understand all of this, rewire your brain to deprogram and unplug that shame response that you feel when certain negative emotions come up. For me, because I used a generalization, but I applied to that generalization, I feel very comfortable with sadness. I've always felt very comfortable feeling sad. I've always felt very comfortable telling other people when I'm feeling sad. I have no issue with it. But until this year, I was fully convinced that I was just a person who did not feel the emotion of anger, which is actually humanly impossible. And all these years, I was wondering why I was struggling so much with so many addictions throughout the years. Like, I smoked cigarettes. I had a period where I drank a lot of alcohol. And to this day, I struggle with overeating. Overeating is the big one for me. It's been the big one since I was a little kid, and it still is. Turns out it was due to a lifelong repression of anger, because anytime I would feel, even to this day, but now that I caught it, okay, so this is the first thing that you're going to do, right? Once you understand all of this, you're going to be like, okay, if all emotions are equal, let me just observe myself in the next couple of days and weeks. You're going to see some emotions come up. And what I realized is that, yes, there were some things that were triggering to me when people were disrespectful, which happens all the time in big cities. Actually, I would feel anger. And I realized only like a couple of weeks ago, oh, my body does something really weird. I immediately repress it and feel shame every time I feel a little bit of anger. And I didn't even know it was anger. I immediately felt shame in the sense that I would have a bad thought towards the person who disrespected me. And immediately the shame would come in, the shame monster being like, you're such a bad person for having that negative thought against that person. You're such a bad person. And then I would completely, immediately forget about the anger. I would only ruminate about the fact that I'm such a horrible person. And then I would go home and lo and behold, I would overeat. And so what I have been doing since I discovered this first lesson is that I have been consciously and intentionally expressing my anger, which has been the craziest thing because I'm pushing 30 and this is the first time I'm doing it ever. It's kind of exciting, but it's also equally scary. So the way I have been doing that in the non-physical way I've been doing it is just thinking about times where people really wronged me, letting the feelings come up and being like, oh, this is making my chest feel compressed. And then I talk out loud to those people and I'm like, why would you do this to me? How could you do this? How could you not do this? Et cetera, et cetera. I would cry and just let myself feel the anger. And at the same time, confront the shame that's coming up and being like, you're allowed to feel like this. You're allowed to feel like this. So that was the first thing. The second thing, writing letters in your notes app or by hand, writing letters to the people who have wronged you when the most. And same thing, pretty much. The third thing is the second aspect is the physical aspect, like letting it out. This is somatic healing. I've done this in a couple of ways. One is listening to like angry music, like hard techno, hard style music, any type of kind of like angry music. And you either go on a run or on a walk, and you intentionally tell yourself that this is you processing the anger for this event or that event. Or you can either do it also while you're weightlifting. It can be anything strenuous as long as you decide intentionally that this is the processing of this event that has made you angry. The last thing that was kind of fun, but also like, what? But fun and healing was just listening again to loud music, taking a pillow, just picturing the person who really pissed me off and just like hitting my bed. And yeah, I had to confront the shame because immediately, as a girl who has been taught to feel shame for anger, I was like, oh, I'm being such a bad girl right now, but I'm alone at home just with a pillow hitting a bed. It's fine. It's fine, girl. And the next day, I felt a lot less angry towards that person. So it worked. And a huge weight had been lifted from me. So yeah, all of this to say, just learn to feel your feelings. That takes time. It takes a lot of time. But the main lesson of all this is to not make sure to learn how to not feel bad for your unpleasant emotions. And don't feel shame when sometimes you can't hide them, okay? They're emotions. And give yourself love and validate your feelings. And just, yeah, when you feel the negative emotions, just be like, yeah, this sucks. This feels like shit, but it's okay. Number 2. So number 1 was very general. Number 2, the reason why I said in the beginning that number 2 would apply mostly to girls is because lesson number 2 is that being a nice person does not equate to being a good person. Let me repeat. Being a nice person does not equate to being a good person. I think now you understand why I said that this applies mostly to girls, because as girls, oh my Lord, every single girl I know pretty much has been taught that if you are not nice, I don't know, you're just taught at a very young age that not being a nice girl is the most unattractive thing, and people will just not like you. You will be rejected by society. You will be seen as just like such an undesirable, not desirable even in the terms of attraction because you're a little girl, but just like a despicable little girl. Like, oh, what is this? This is a little girl, but she's not nice. So you very quickly create the false belief, you are taught the false belief that if you are not nice all the time, you are not a good person, which couldn't be further from the truth. And again, what is this related to? Shame. You are taught to feel shame if you are not nice all the time. And what does being nice all the time mean? Oh, by the way, nice does not mean kind. Kind, you have a kind heart when you're a good person. Nice means you're just pleasant all the time. So what does that mean? Because that's humanly impossible given the world we live in, and there's a lot of assholes out there, etc. And there's a lot of times where you're not in a good mood. Being nice all the time means letting everybody overstepping your boundaries all the time, having no boundaries. It also means people pleasing all the time. Thus, it means that expressing any of your needs, desires, and opinions, if they don't go the same way as everyone around you, makes you feel shame, which is insane because it is physically, humanly impossible to please everyone because we are insane as a species. And this creates such a huge spiral of madness. And no wonder people have been saying that women have been like so hard to deal with for decades and decades, because imagine trying to live to those impossible standards. And what's so sad is that women who would not do this would be shamed for it and called difficult by society, even by women, because they themselves had been brainwashed. But now, in the past couple of months, as I have been doing all of this healing and understanding, and just uncovering all the aspects of shame within myself and in society, I've truly been realizing that a lot of people who are very nice are not good people, or at least they are, because they force themselves to be nice all the time, they are so full of resentment and you can see it, and it's not a pretty sight. And conversely, something that I have only realized even more recently, because I was myself too brainwashed to see it before, is that a lot of people who are not nice, and I couldn't see it before because I would just stay away from those people because I was scared and intimidated by them. But a lot of people who are not all nice all the time and not people pleasy, and women in particular, actually you observe them a little bit, and if you get to know them, a lot of them are amazing people with huge hearts, very kind, the best values. So lesson number 2 is you do not need to be nice all the time. Protect yourself, set those boundaries, let go of people pleasing. And whenever you do set those boundaries and prioritize yourself, let go of any belief and thought that pops up that you are not a good person for it. And if anybody tries to make you feel that way, just remember everything I've been saying so far and just tell yourself that person is trying to shame me. And even if they're not a bad person, that is unacceptable, and stand your ground. You got this. Last but not least, the most specific thing that I uncovered in my past luteal phase, and this is probably the biggest shadow for me and the one that really triggered this horrible luteal phase. And actually, let me do a little story time. I think there was some sort of cosmic coincidence, divine intervention. Even if you're not spiritual, some coincidences are too obvious, and they really make me feel that there's some things that we don't understand up there. Because my luteal phase started mid-July, no, even beginning of July, and there was a trigger at the same time that happened in my personal life, but I didn't even realize that it was a trigger, that it had triggered me, because it affected a shadow that I had, the one that I uncovered, but a shadow that had been looming over my psyche since childhood, but that was a huge blind spot, but that had been torturing me for years and years and years. And so I got triggered and I didn't know because it was in my blind spot. And I was just wondering why this luteal phase was so much worse than any of the ones I had had in 2025. Why? Because the luteal phase is never a pleasant moment. It's the worst. It's the most unpleasant phase of your menstrual cycle, especially psychologically. But I was so scared because the nature of my dark thoughts they were as dark as the years before I had done all the therapy, all the healing, all the meditations, the journaling. So I was like, why are we back into like 2018? I hadn't felt this type of depression in years, and it was very scary, especially because I didn't know why. And the divine intervention that I'm talking about is that as I was descending into madness and into this depression and not understanding why, one day I was scrolling on YouTube Shorts, and this video pops up of Dr. K, a psychologist, who coincidentally was talking about the fact that he has clients who suffered from CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, who would come to him and say, Dr. K, I don't understand why after years of therapy and healing, I still suffer quite intensely from some effects of trauma. And so I'm watching and I'm like, wait, that's kind of what I'm going through right now. Like, I'm suddenly getting this depression that is the same as before I did all the years of therapy, and I hadn't felt this depressed. And I thought I had been healed because I had truly faced all of my abusers in therapy, et cetera, et cetera. And he says, a lot of these people don't understand that the final boss of healing from CPTSD is not actually dealing with the abuse that you very obviously were a victim of from the abusers, but it is actually about realizing that you have repressed anger towards the adults in your childhood who were loving to you and who were kind to you. And once you uncover all of this, it is about dealing with your lifelong shame for that repressed anger. The way I had to put my phone down, and I was dizzy. Because that had hit the nail on the head and that was the exact trigger. I was like, that was a blind spot that I had been dealing with since I was a little kid. And the reason why it's the final boss of CPTSD and why a lot of people who have suffered from CPTSD and went to therapy for it don't realize it until maybe ever or until very late, like me now, is because in your childhood, if you have one or several adults who were very abusive and mean to you, the adults who were very nice and loving to you, I mean, you put them on this pedestal because it was very much like night and day. Like, these people are very clearly hurting me and these people are giving me love. So these people in your head as a kid, they're your gods. Like, they're your source of oxygen and safety and survival, literally. But the thing is, with CPTSD, the very definition and nature of CPTSD is that as a kid, these abusers were able to abuse you time and time again over the span of years, every week, every month, for years of your childhood. That is why it is complex PTSD. And it's different from PTSD, where it's just a one-time thing. Complex is just it really destroys your brain because it keeps happening. And that means, and I hate to break it to you if you're identifying with any of this, and it really blew my brain as well, that means that to some extent, the loving adult or adults in your life it's kind of cruel to say they allowed this to happen, but at least they didn't do enough to prevent it from happening again and again and again, tens and hundreds of times over the span of years. Now, very often, the very reason why they were not able to do that, even though they didn't outright abuse you, and even though they have only given love to you and support to you, is because they themselves are also had been the victims of this type of abuse and CPTSD to some extent. And so you can't really protect anyone in your life properly if you don't even know what that looks like, because nobody has done it for you. And so the way you do it is that you give love to that kid, but then you have blind spots when it comes to the abuse because you yourself, that's the way you grew up to know love. And so I had this bomb dropped on me that just made the past 20 years of my life so much clearer. And going back to my initial first point, I was like, oh, I've been having this anger in me for 20 years that I wasn't even conscious of. And whenever it would pop up and whenever those loving adults in my life would do things that would trigger that anger, I wouldn't be able to recognize it. And instead, I just felt immense shame. And for years in therapy, I was like, I don't know why, but I just feel like I'm the worst person in the world all the time, and that I'm despicable. And I'm just like, I just really felt like I was the worst person in the world. And that led to so much isolation, so much self-sabotage, depression, freeze response, just staying at home, not wanting to do anything, lot of addictions, binge eating, the whole nine. And this whole time I was telling people, I don't know what anger feels like. I'm just not an angry person. And I was kind of saying that with pride. And I think it's because the people who very clearly abused me in my childhood had anger issues. And that was something that I was very proud to not have in common with them. Little did I know, the anger in itself wasn't the bad thing in these abusers. It was the way that they would use this anger to hurt a child. But anger in itself is not bad. But that's the way I took it. And oh boy. Yeah. That's where we arrive at the point where I realize now that repressed emotion, if you repress any emotion, the very act of repressing an emotion, especially um, if you manage to repress it continuously, thanks to shame, will destroy your life and the life of people who are around you. I hate to say it. I've been the victim and I've also been the perpetrator. I haven't abused anyone, but the fact that I was isolating myself so many times because of the shame means that I wasn't there for people, I'm sure, who needed it at times because I was just holed up at home in my depression because I was repressing emotions because I was ashamed. And so, what I've been doing regarding this last point is, yeah, what I said in the first point, which is I've been writing some imaginary letters to these adults who were loving to me in childhood, but who time and time again did not protect me and did not seek out proper justice the hundreds of times where I was violated, disrespected, and abused. I expressed all of my angers in imaginary conversations with them, and that was painful. I cried, but every time I had those imaginary conversations with them, it would always end in forgiveness because I would first talk about what happened, but then I would be like, but I get it because also it was blind spots for them, and I would talk about that. And at the end, it was all love. But I had processed that emotion and I feel like a different person. And ever since, I mean, I did this like 2 weeks ago, right? But ever since now, like I go in the street and when people are disrespectful to me, I'll have the anger come up and I'll be like, that's fucking rude. And I'll feel the anger. And now I don't feel the shame anymore. And if you didn't have that problem before, you won't understand what I'm saying. But like until like a couple of weeks ago, whenever I would have that, for example, someone was rude to me or would like push me, and I would have like a thought of like, oh, that fucking asshole. Immediately for me, it would be like, I'm a terrible person for having had that thought. And I don't have that anymore. And oh my gosh, it's taken so long, but you know what? Better late than never. Better late than ever. But seeing how much of an impact, how lighter I feel and how much more peace I feel and self-love and self-trust, because having shame is basically you being your own enemy. And that means that you're living with your worst enemy 24/7 in your head. Like imagine living your life with a voice telling you that you're a terrible person 24/7. That was me for years and years and years. No wonder then you're going to find out ways to escape your brain, whether it's through food or drugs or alcohol. Like, no wonder if you have someone screaming in your head all the time that you're a horrible person and you don't deserve love and happiness. God, like you would be weird not to escape. But yeah, I absolutely needed to come here and share this with you because even if it only helps one person, it would be a success because of how much this has just these realizations have helped me. And also, last but not least, I have been able to realize everything I just talked about today because of this practice where every time I feel down during my luteal phase, but even if you're a man and you don't have these luteal phases, just every time I feel bad, I let myself feel bad. And once I feel a little bit better, I journal about it and I'm like, okay. Or what you can do as a man is just like every month, since you don't have this menstrual cycle thing, you could just kind of do a recap and be like, okay, what have been my worst triggers in the past week or the past month? And if you really dig deep, you describe the trigger, you describe what happened, you describe exactly what you felt, and you try to analyze why it triggered you, you will find some gems about yourself. And you will break free from some chains that have been preventing you from loving yourself and trying to achieve certain things and connecting with the world. So yeah, shadow work is one of the hardest things you'll ever do, but it is one of the things that will truly make you evolve the most by far. That was all for today. I really didn't prepare anything for this video in terms of bullet points or scripts. This was kind of like a stream of consciousness. I hope it makes sense. If you have any questions or if you relate in any way, or if this triggered any complementary or additional thoughts, or even if you're not agreeing with certain things, or you would like to offer some nuance, I would love to hear that. So put all of that in the comments, and I'll see you very soon in the next video. Bye.